review progress on draft rules for Oregon's building performance standards, meeting of June 5th. We'll give everyone just a couple more minutes to get logged on. But if you're here to hear about building performance standards draft rules, you're in the right spot. Let's see, I thought I saw a raised hand there. Maybe it's down now. We'll kind of go over the process for participation in today's meeting here in a minute. Okay, well, I think it's I've got 1:02 on my clock here, so I think we can probably go ahead and get started, and I imagine we'll get a few more folks logging in. But welcome. My name is Blake Shalide. I'm the manager of codes and standards at the Oregon Department of Energy, and we're the agency that's tasked with implementing and developing Oregon's building performance standards. So today we're going to talk about kind of the progress to date on developing these rules, and give the public an opportunity to make comments on the rules that our Rulemaking Advisory Committee and ODO have been working on over the last two RAC meetings. When I say RAC, that's an acronym for Rulemaking Advisory Committee. So if you hear me say that, that's what that means. And today's mostly intended to be kind of a listening session. The draft rules have been posted on our website, and we've got official comment portals, comment forms opened up. And certainly happy to take any comments today and kind of answer high-level clarifying type questions. But today's mostly intended to be a listening session for the public to provide an interim early opportunity to make comments on the first few chapters of our draft rules. So again, my name is Blake Shalide. I'm manager of codes and standards with the Oregon Department of Energy. And as we get into the meeting today, just a few kind of WebEx clarifying items. So there's, all attendees should be, I think, I believe you are muted by default. But if you want to say something, feel free to raise your hand and we'll kind of go through that, that list as it comes up. And in today's meeting, there is not a chat function, but there is a Q&A instead. So if you do have a question to pose to Odo, or to the other folks on the call, please feel free to put that in the Q&A, and then we'll progress through any questions that we receive during the meeting, and certainly take some time at the end to gather the questions and hopefully try to respond to them if we can today, recognizing that there might be some questions that we get that we just aren't able to respond to in real time. Then we'll do our best to follow up there. So you should see a little Q&A box near the bottom right-hand side of the screen. And unfortunately, I think it's not actually shown on this screenshot. So sorry about that. But in the same area where you see like the apps, participants, and chat on this screen, you should see a little Q&A. Maybe it's a box with a question mark in it. And that should give you the opportunity to submit a question if you do have one. So today's agenda, we'll give kind of a welcome, and that's what we're going through now. I'll again just provide a quick overview of like what building performance standards are, if you haven't been present or tracking with some of our previous calls, our public calls, or introductory listening sessions. And then we'll give just a quick introduction to this Tier 2 Buildings Advisory Committee. We've got an interest form that's out right now, and we're actively recruiting for members for that committee. And there's a link to the form up on our website and on this slide deck. I'll give a quick update on our process for energy use target setting as part of the Building Performance Standards program development. And then we'll get into draft rule review and comments, and then talk about kind of closing next steps and some of the key dates that are coming up with our BPS rule development. And then you'll see this linked in a few different places, both up on the website and in this slide deck, which will be up on the website after this meeting too. But we've got some links to the comment portal. So we've got one comment portal that's applicable for chapters 1 through 3 of Standard 100 and our draft rules, and another comment portal that's applicable for chapters 4 through 6. So if you do have comments, we definitely encourage you to log those in the portal, in the form. Just that helps us kind of keep them all together and manage them and group them and filter them, just to make sure that we're capturing all of them as we go through the process and that we don't miss anything. So this is our agency's mission, vision slide of what we do. And then, I also just wanted to note that this meeting is being recorded. So before I forget that. So just a quick building performance standards overview. Building performance standards, or BPS, are an emerging type of policy that is establishing specific performance levels that existing buildings must achieve in the kind of time frame by which they must meet that target. They're being recognized and implemented as a tool across a number of jurisdictions throughout the country for reducing energy use and emissions from existing buildings, as a key part to help Oregon and help other jurisdictions meet climate goals. They're generally considered complementary to energy codes, where codes apply for new construction and then BPS applies for existing buildings. And they're generally adopted by jurisdictions applying to existing, large commercial buildings, in some cases multifamily buildings as well. In Oregon, we define Tier 1 and Tier 2 buildings as part of the legislation, House Bill 3409, that set up building performance standards. The Tier 1 buildings are the ones that will need to comply with the building performance standards, while Tier 2 will initially only be required to benchmark and report their energy. And in Oregon, the Tier 1 buildings are generally larger than 35,000 square feet, commercial, non-residential, hotels, and motels. So those are Tier 1 buildings. Tier 2 buildings are kind of dependent on the sector, and specifically multifamily residential, hospitals, schools, dorms, and university buildings are kind of by definition Tier 2 buildings if they're over 35,000 square feet. Also included in Tier 2 buildings are those commercial hotels and motels that are between 20 and 35,000 square feet. So kind of the smaller end of the size threshold, between 20 and 35,000 square feet for those commercial buildings. But then for the multifamily residential, hospitals, schools, dorms, and universities, those are Tier 2, as they're larger than 35,000 square feet. And then if they're under any of these size thresholds, they're just not a covered building under the BPS program. So just important to kind of just lay out the scopes of Tier 1 and Tier 2 as we get into this call, and we'll try to just include this as an introductory slide in most of the presentations that we give, just to ground folks. And then this is the timeline of some of the key dates that are included in the BPS legislation, House Bill 3409. So we're in the process right now of developing our rules. In 2024, we have to complete our rulemaking by the end of the year, December 31st, to set up our building performance standards programs. And then we've got future dates that kick in for notifying building owners, and then actually compliance for these largest of the Tier 1 buildings starts, the 200,000 square feet and larger, starts in June of 2028. About a month after that is when the Tier 2 buildings need to benchmark. And then a year after that, in June of 2029, the Tier 1 buildings, 90,000 square feet and larger, will need to comply. And then 1 year after that, in June of 2030, the Tier 1 buildings, the smaller range of the Tier 1 buildings, 35,000 square feet and larger, will need to comply with the BPS. So just an overall timeline for what's coming down the line and over the next few years with the BPS program. Let's see. So for the next thing I wanted to mention is a Tier 2 buildings advisory committee. So we've been working with a rulemaking advisory committee to help us with the development of these rules that we're going to review today. But the legislation also asks us to form and establish and consult an advisory committee for Tier 2 buildings by July of next year, of 2025. But we recognize that we want to engage a Tier 2 advisory committee a little bit sooner than that, and really start its work now, because one, it will help inform our current rules that do cover some tier 2 buildings related topics related to the energy benchmarking requirements for those buildings. So we want to get input from this advisory committee to help inform our current year of rulemaking as it relates to benchmarking for tier 2 buildings, but just with the expectation and knowledge that this tier 2 advisory committee's work will also extend into 2025 and beyond to help us with that evaluation of the financial and non-financial implications of a potential full energy performance standard for tier 2 buildings, which we have to deliver a report to. This seems like forever away now in 2030, but it'll certainly be here, I think, before we know it. So we have a kind of a report to recommend a energy building performance standard for tier 2 buildings that's coming down the line, and we'll look to this advisory group to help us with that. So we've posted on our website a link to a tier 2 advisory committee interest form. Right now it's set to close, just to kind of gather the, just to set a deadline for folks to hopefully respond by. It's set to close at 5 p.m. on Friday, June 14th, so that we can gather the responses and begin to establish that committee. But just know that if for whatever reason, there's not a submittal, if you don't get your submittal in by Friday, June 14th, that definitely won't be the last opportunity to engage with this committee, especially because it'll be kind of a multi-year type committee that we'll be meeting with. So, but we do want to collect this initial phase of responses by the 14th, so that we can get that moving. And then just a quick update on our energy use target setting analysis. So one of the key elements of standing up a BPS program is defining the energy use targets that a building by type, by climate zone must meet. And if you're kind of familiar with the way that the targets are set out within the ASHRAE 100 standard or within some of the other jurisdictions that have implemented BPS, they have separate unique targets for different building types, different occupancy classifications for different climate zones. And in Oregon, the energy use targets will be set to be no more stringent than the average energy use for that building type. So we're going through the effort right now to gather and analyze the available data sets to help us inform, okay, what is the average energy use for a building type? And then that'll help us set the targets for those building types. And we issued a request for proposals for a consultant to help us with this analysis and this work. We received a number of submittals to that, and we've gone through our internal evaluation and are in the process right now of notifying the successful proposal proponent to get that kind of contract in place. So that should be relatively set, or should be set relatively soon. But we're kind of in the final stages right now of bringing on board the consultant to help us out with that analysis and that work. So expect a little bit more to come on that with our future meetings, and definitely expect that will be an area of interest for a lot of building owners, of the industry, and how those energy use targets are set. So there will definitely be opportunity for more public input and engagement with the methodology that we use to analyze the data sets that we use, and then the targets that are ultimately set. So there'll be future meetings to discuss those. But just a quick update on where we are with that process. And then that kind of brings us to the opportunity for draft rule review and comment. So hopefully folks that have looked up on our website, we posted the draft rules late last week for review, or so you have them and you can look over them. But in general, ODO's draft rules will follow the same structure as ASHRAE Standard 100 2024. So that's what we're using as a base document, as directed by the statute. So we're using that as the model, and just pretty much making modifications and amendments to ASHRAE Standard 100 as we go through to make it specific for Oregon's BPS purposes. And if you're familiar with the way that Washington State's done it, they've pretty much structured their rules similarly after the chapters of ASHRAE Standard 100, and Oregon is doing the same. So this just outlines the general structure for Standard 100 with its different chapters, starting in Chapter 1, Purpose, and going all the way through really chapter 9, implementation and verification requirements for our purposes. And then there's a number of normative and informative appendices that will also be part of our rulemaking. But what we're covering today, what our Rulemaking Advisory Committee and ODO have kind of made it through progress to date, is a look at chapters 1 through 6. So that's what we've posted up on the website, is a draft with Oregon modifications for chapters 1 through 6. And you'll notice if you open up that document that it also includes the rest of Standard 100 unmodified, but we haven't gotten there yet. So if you look at like chapter 7, 8, 9, and don't see any changes, that's because we haven't tackled that yet as a rulemaking advisory committee with ODO working through them. All that we're looking for comments on as part of this phase and this cycle are the modifications to chapters 1 through 6.
So Blake, this is Wendy.
Yeah.
There's a question, if you can see it in the Q&A. Someone asked if commercial includes industrial, distribution, and manufacturing, or if those are exempt.
Mm-hmm. So there are exemptions for industrial use and for agricultural use buildings within the statute. And in order to be exempt for industrial, it's got to be classified as a factory. And this all goes in alignment with the building type classifications of the building code. So it's got to be a high hazard classification or a factory type class F classification in order to be exempt. And there's another number of other exemption pathways in the statute as well for things like financial hardship, things like low or no occupancy. But one thing that I do want to point out with regard to exemptions is that if a building meets one of those exemption criteria, it's not that it's just automatically exempt from the BPS on its own. It would still need to apply for and be granted an exemption. And that process will be defined as we go actually implement the program, next year. But it's not that it's just automatically out. It's kind of self-determined. It would have to apply for and be a known building for ODO to be able to note, like, yes, this meets the exemption criteria and it's an exempt type of building. So thanks. Okay, and I do see a comment about clicking on a link to the Tier 2 Advisory Committee interest form on the website. Maybe don't have permission. Okay, so that's something, I thought we tested that out, but we might need to look at that. I'm curious if anyone else is able to access it. Okay, I see.
So Blake, yeah, I see
looks
two
like
people have told us that they're having issues with it. I'm going to check with our IT people offline and see if we can get any answers right now.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Wendy. And if it does seem like there's an issue with responding to that, then we can certainly, if it takes a while to fix, we can certainly extend that deadline for responses. I want to give folks an opportunity, easy opportunity to respond, make sure that they've got that ability. So thanks for noting that for the folks that did. So just in general, the amendments that we've made to House Bill 34, to ASHRAE Standard 100, as we've been working through it with the Rulemaking Advisory Committee. So we made, generally alignments to match with House Bill 3409. We brought in the definitions from that statute, and we've also made general modifications to the references in ASHRAE Standard 100 to source energy and to greenhouse gas emissions. And, in general, removed things like references to the greenhouse gas emissions targets, to source energy type targets, because Oregon's building performance standard is based on site energy, and that's defined in House Bill 3409. So if you read through ASHRAE Standard 100, it's developed on a broader scale that kind of gives jurisdictions the option and the opportunity to tailor it to meet the jurisdictional needs. So it's pretty broad in its application, where it could apply to jurisdictions that want to adopt greenhouse gas targets. It could apply to jurisdictions that want to adopt source energy targets. So what we've needed to do as we go through it is to modify it so that it's specific to site energy. So, we've had to just kind of strike out all the references to greenhouse gas targets and emissions reduction measures and things like that. So you'll notice that as you go through the draft rules. And then also one change with the 2024 version of Standard 100 is that it's now kind of structured based on gross energy use. And gross energy use would kind of add together any grid supplied electricity plus on-site renewable electricity, for example, to calculate a building's total energy use footprint, energy use intensity. The Oregon statute is based on, and Oregon's BPS will be based on net energy use. So with the net energy use concept, a building would get a benefit from, it wouldn't necessarily count against a building's energy use if it were generating and using renewable energy on site. Where the gross energy use concept, it would count toward a building's total energy use, any renewable energy that's generated on site. So we've had to go through and modify the language in there to take into account the net energy use concept, where a building doesn't necessarily get penalized for on-site generation that's used at the building site. So just one thing that you'll notice as you go through. We've tried to also kind of pair up Washington State's building performance standards, since Oregon's was modeled pretty closely after Washington's, as we go through and bring in elements of that standard. Although one of the things that we've noticed is that Washington's BPS was based on a previous version of Standard 100, and a lot of the Washington amendments to Standard 100 actually made it into the 2024 version of that standard, so which is what we're basing our BPS on. So some of those have already been incorporated in the base document that we're working on off of. And then also just one of the things that we kind of talked about with our Rulemaking Advisory Committee are considerations for what's part of this. So there's a requirement in the standard for an energy and emissions management plan, and there's a number of criteria and elements that are listed under that plan that shall be incorporated into the plan. Some of the elements are a little more critical probably than others. So you might notice as you go through the draft rules that there's some elements that are listed as like shall be incorporated, and others that are listed and that we modified that may be incorporated into the plan. So that's one thing that we're interested in, is some feedback there from a balance perspective of like, what are the critical elements of this plan? What are the best practices that should be included, but maybe aren't completely necessary, to try to have a good and a kind of a fair balance between effort that's required to develop and implement the plan, and things that are just kind of nice to have from a building owner's perspective. So as we kind of go through just some flagged areas for input that we're hoping to get some input on, and definitely doesn't need to be today. You can definitely submit them through the comment forms, but we've got these definitions for like, what does it take to be a qualified energy auditor? What does it mean to be a qualified energy manager and a qualified person? And each of these different roles has a different, each of these different titles has a slightly different role within a building performance standard. So like a qualified energy auditor, if a building owner, if a building isn't meeting the energy use performance target, then the requirement is that they generally need to do an audit, identify energy efficiency measures to help that building get down to energy performance levels to meet the standard. And to do that, they need to hire a qualified energy auditor. So, what does it mean to be a qualified energy auditor? Right now, we've got kind of three criteria in there that would allow somebody to be an auditor: either a licensed architect or engineer, an ASHRAE building energy, BEAM building energy auditing, like certification, or there's also another auditing certification from the AEE, a certified energy auditor, the same organization that certifies energy managers. So there's another certification there. So there's like one of those three criteria, those three certifications are listed right now for somebody to be a qualified energy auditor. So, interested in any feedback from there. Similarly, there's a number of criteria that would allow somebody to be a qualified energy manager and a qualified person. And a qualified person for the purposes of the standard is the one that is mostly responsible for like evaluating the energy use and the appropriate energy targets for a building, and then submitting to ODO the appropriate compliance documentation. So there's a number of criteria that we've listed, and it's similar to what's in Standard 100 now, and also to the way that the Washington program defined it for what does it mean to be a qualified person. So we're definitely interested in comments there. I talked a little bit about the like the energy and emissions management plan. What are mandatory versus kind of what are best practice components of that plan. We're interested in some input with that section to have strike the right balance between level of effort and kind of the benefit of things that go into that plan. There's some language within the standard that relates to exported energy and measurement versus estimation. So House Bill 3409 is pretty specific about not including energy use for transportation against a building's total energy use. So like things like EV charging, when it's fed through the building's electrical system, shouldn't count toward a building's EUI for the purposes of meeting the BPS. In some cases, that's measured, and a building owner can just subtract that out through an additional calculation. But there's also some language in Standard 100 that might allow for like estimation of some of those exported energy uses, so exported for beneficial use. So we're interested in any comments around there. And then also there's a section that details the responsibilities of an energy manager, like the energy manager that a building owner assigns to a building. And a lot of those responsibilities deal with like what's that energy manager's role within an organization, within like the covered buildings organization. So definitely interested in comments on those responsibilities that are listed within the standard. And so I've just highlighted a few areas for input here, but we've got the entire chapters 1 through 6 out there for draft comment, and we definitely want to hear back any comments that relate to anything on chapters 1 through 6. So I think now it will probably be a good time to pause just to take any like high-level questions, comments on any of the draft rules that we've got up there now, because the next section just talks about like what's coming down the line with the rulemaking and stakeholder engagement process. So yeah, happy now to look at any Q&A that might have come through with regard to the draft rules. But again, definitely encourage folks to submit any comments you might have by through the forms, using the comment forms that we've got up.
So far, Blake, I don't see additional questions, but
okay, I do see a couple raised
actually
hands.
yeah, it just came in. So
okay, so I've got Brad Reed and then Tim Miller with a raised hand. So I'll
okay, and then we have a question from
I'll go to
JC.
them first. So
Okay.
Go ahead, Brad. I think you're on.
Yeah. You got me? All right. Thanks, Blake. Thanks for all the folks putting on the public forum. This is Brad Reed. I run the Building Resilience Coalition. A lot of our groups watching this rulemaking really closely, excited for good outcomes. I just wanted to make kind of a comment and actually a bit of praise for Blake and Odo. I've been observing the RAC meetings, understanding, of course, that the law was written to focus on energy intensity usage. I feel like you all have not lost the thread that's in the legislation that says also to seek to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to the maximum possible through energy use, which of course we know. Generally, if you lower energy use, increase efficiency, you reduce emissions. So I just wanted to say thank you for keeping that through line during the rulemaking. We sometimes know legislative intent doesn't always translate to rules. And so just wanted to mention that as far as the general amendments were concerned.
Yeah, thanks, Brad. Thanks for that, and thanks for your engagement. Let's see, going next to Tim Miller. Tim, you should be unmuted.
Thanks so much for this, Blake, and everyone else who's hosting. I think my question relates a little bit to what Brad just brought up, and I appreciate this. I know you got a ton of ground to cover, Blake. But there was that early slide where you talked about net use and gross use and not GHG use, and I wonder if you can help me with instead of GHG. Because I'm pretty concerned about GHGs. I get that that's not always in the direct well, I get that that's a question mark, and how do you look after that and how do you optimize on that? So can you say more about that?
Sure. Yeah. So House Bill 3409 is pretty specific about our building performance standard based on site energy. So it's the energy use that is kind of used and measured at the building site. So think like your utility meters. So our energy use intensity targets will be based on like a kBTU per square foot per year of energy that's used at the site. If you look through ASHRAE Standard 100 itself, it kind of offers both options, either an EUI target or a greenhouse gas intensity target. And to calculate that greenhouse gas intensity target, it's directly related to the site energy use, but it just applies an emissions factor, a stationary combustion emissions factor for things like natural gas or propane, and then a scope 2 electricity emissions factor for on-site electricity use, and then it just converts that energy use to a greenhouse gas target. And the Standard 100 actually provides that framework too, where it offers tables with building greenhouse gas targets in there also. So it kind of offers both, but within the Oregon Building Performance Standard, we will be only focusing on the site energy use, kilobTUs per square foot per year. Well, the target is based on that. We won't have a separate greenhouse gas intensity target, but maybe kind of back to Brad's point, with the recognition that the overall goal of the program is to help Oregon meet its greenhouse gas reduction goals, and that's kind of the first charging language of the statute, and we've included it within the purpose of our rules as well too. And you'll kind of see the greenhouse gas piece embedded a little bit through our rules, and this was what came back from the Rulemaking Advisory Committee around things like doing an energy audit with the decarbonization assessment, and that's part of the standard too. Still kind of keeping an energy and emissions reduction management plan in there, but with regard to like specific references to like a greenhouse gas emissions target for an office building, like we won't have that because our BPS is based on energy use intensity targets.
So it won't be, so GHGs wouldn't be in a target, but looks like they will be, and I know you'll probably get to this later, but they will be in the management plan, it sounds like, and they will be in sort of a reporting exercise.
Right. So it would still be kind of a direction to building owners to include emissions reductions as part of their energy management plan. And the one thing that our agency will be tasked with after we collect the energy use information from buildings is to then translate that to greenhouse gas emissions for those buildings. So that'll be something that we do after we get the energy data reported to us. So yeah, definitely still in like kind of an overarching goal for greenhouse gas emissions through energy use intensity reductions.
Got it. Okay, that's helpful. Thanks, Blake.
Yeah. Let's see, now moving to, I think we've got some Q&A also. And Wendy, I don't know if you kind of want to, if you're able to kind of read the questions that came in first to help make sure we don't miss any.
Sure, Blake. Sorry, I'm just trying to chase down this access to the Tier 1 interest forms. So
okay,
we're working on that, and we'll share it as soon as we can. So there's first a question from JC Lindsay saying that it looks like the BPS will only be required for commercial buildings, not multifamily, and asked if that's the correct understanding. And it sounds like it might be a little more complex than that. So Blake, if you want to talk about the multifamily.
Right. Yeah. So the building performance standard itself, so like meeting an energy use target, will not apply for Tier 2 buildings, and multifamily buildings are one of the Tier 2 type of buildings. So multifamily buildings will be required to, if they're over that square footage, 35,000 square feet, will be required to benchmark to report their energy usage, but there won't be any requirements for meeting an energy use target.
Great, thanks. So the next question I have is from Joe Schmutzler.
Mm-hmm.
and he said a nice element of the Seattle BEPS program is that they plan to allow combining multiple sites owned by a single customer to be reviewed together. Is there any possibility of that in the Oregon program? Most customers review projects as a lump sum, so that would be better from a financing standpoint.
Yeah, I'll say that that's something we're looking at, and we'll definitely take your comment under advisement. That's something that could be good to see. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks. So Alan Jonet, I don't know if you'll have additional comments on this, Blake, but this is getting at part of the discussion you just had. HB 3409 is designed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, yet as I understand the commentary so far, greenhouse gas emissions reductions are not stated as a goal. So I don't know if you have anything additional you want to say about that, Blake, or I think.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I think that looks like more of just like a comment.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't think I've got much else to.
Okay.
There.
So Brian Stewart, Blake, following up on this greenhouse gas versus emissions, I imagine, versus on-site energy, I have a question about how you will compare on-site energy use of natural gas versus electricity for heating.
So the comparison, yeah, thanks for the question. The comparison will be, it won't necessarily be a comparison. It'll just be like a summation of the site energy use. So kind of as recorded at the building meter, at the building utility meter. So it'll take, if the building has gas usage, it'll look at the consumption through that gas meter, in terms of therms converting to a common unit of BTUs between the two, just the straight energy use conversion. And then electricity, similarly, just it would look at the usage as measured at the building meter and sum that up, combine that with any other on-site energy usage to generate the building's total energy consumption and EUI.
Thanks, Blake. The next question we have is from Trevor Weltzer. He mentions OPSIS. Will the reporting require disclosing gross energy use and production as well as net use? For the purpose of GHG conversions, it seems like this would be necessary since a building which overproduces solar power but also uses natural gas could be net zero but still have a greenhouse gas emissions footprint.
So yeah, right now we'll the EUI itself will only be based on this net use. We will use Energy Star Portfolio Manager for reporting. And I believe that Portfolio Manager has some ability to capture like on-site generation that's used on the site, on-site generation, if it's known and measured, that's exported from the site. So there might be that ability to then kind of back calculate the gross energy usage of a building as well. Which could be interesting to look at, but for BPS purposes, like meeting the target will only be based on the net energy use.
Thanks, Blake. Our next question is from Diane Meisenhelter, or I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Why are multifamily buildings exempt from energy use reduction standards? If you have anything to say about kind of what was the thinking behind that, Blake?
I think the only thing that I'll say there is that that's what's in the statute. So that's what came to us in the bill.
Yeah.
Yep. I won't pretend to give a legislative intent.
Yeah, so there may have been discussion that's available in the testimony related to the bill or the oral discussions on the legislative website, but I don't know that there's anything directly in the legislation that would give an indication either. Tim Miller had I guess a comment or suggestion, it looks like. Sounds like greenhouse gas emissions will only be looked at by ODO when you roll up numbers after the fact, rather than building owners doing that calculation themselves. Seems like it should be made visible to each building owner. So for those who want to make progress on it, they can track their greenhouse gas emissions. Do you have any comment, Blake?
So, I mean, I think from our agency standpoint, I think it definitely makes makes sense for a building owner to be calculating and kind of tracking their greenhouse gas emissions too. If that's part of like an organizational goal to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Kind of to that point though, we like that. I think that's part of the reason that some of the language around like an energy and emissions management plan is retained within Standard 100, and that was some of the guidance and feedback that the Rulemaking Advisory Committee gave was to, even if a building owner isn't having to meet a greenhouse gas reduction target, it still offers a lot of value and it offers a lot of benefit for the building owner to still consider greenhouse gas emissions within their overall energy and emissions management plan. So some of that language does remain within the draft rules, particularly in with the potential. Like we know that some local jurisdictions have the ability to and are exploring options for energy or building performance standards that either go like broader or like um, more strict than the state building performance standard that could potentially be based off of a greenhouse gas emissions type standard. We've seen similar happen in Washington State with a statewide BPS that's based on energy use, and then a Seattle specific performance standard that's based on greenhouse gas emissions. So, we think there's still some value in directing a building owner to still consider greenhouse gas emissions, like with an audit that they do for decarbonization assessments, with energy and emissions management plans, just looking toward the potential for a local jurisdictional BPS that maybe does consider greenhouse gas emissions targets.
I think I'm going to skip ahead to the next question because it's also related to greenhouse gas emissions, and then we'll back up to the question by Neil Bonsgard before that. Alan Journet had a comment about greenhouse gas emissions, or a question. When greenhouse gas emissions are assessed, are these just combustion emissions of a fossil fuel employed to generate electricity, or do they comprise full life cycle emissions assessment? If just combustion emissions, the assessment gives methane pollution an unreasonable pass on the fugitive emissions upstream.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the specific emissions factors that we use after we gather all the buildings data, like that'll come in a few years when we do that analysis. After we get buildings data, starting in 2028, 2029. But right now, we're just referencing in the definitions the emissions factors that are used by the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality. So, and those incorporate utility-specific electricity emissions factors, and I believe they're mostly for the combustion. They're mostly just for the like the on-site emissions that happen on the site. I don't think that they include much around like fugitive emissions for natural gas.
Okay, yeah, thanks for that question, Alan. So backing up, Neil Bonsgard had a question. Have the building types been established yet? Will you be using the relatively large breadth of building types in Building Portfolio Manager, or is another list being considered?
We are looking to the Portfolio Manager list of building types. Yeah.
Great. Those are all the questions that I see right now in the Q&A.
Okay. I do see another, just scrolling down, it looks like there's a question or maybe a comment just about multi-tenant buildings responsible for tenant meters to sync. So that is one thing that we will be looking at in a future rulemaking discussion too, about how to, working with our utility partners and building owners about how to aggregate data for multi-tenant sites. We understand that's not always an easy process or an easy solution, but that is something we'll be talking about in future rulemaking meetings. Haven't really gotten too far into it yet, though. Okay. Oh, I do see we have a few hands raised there too. So now, I think we can Go to, let's see, I'll just go down the line. Brian Stewart. Oh, thought you were unmuted there.
There you go. Thanks. Sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on that question of on-site energy use, and I guess I'm thinking in the case of a compliance situation, if someone switched from natural gas heating to a heat pump heating, and I'm just curious about what your point of view is about the on-site energy use reduction that you would get out of that, because we understand that this kind of statutes is set up as an energy use, an on-site energy use metric as opposed to greenhouse gases. But if you do a switch like that, you would see a huge difference in on-site energy use because of the higher efficiency factors that you get from heat pumps, if you're measuring it as on-site energy only. So I'm just really curious about what your methodology is going to be for how you would compare the on-site energy use if someone switches from natural gas to electricity for heating, and as a compliance measure. Like, how are you going to deal with that? Is there a methodology there?
Yeah, so I don't know that there's a methodology other than just it remains a summation of total total site energy use. So if you take like a before retrofit case, that includes some total gas plus some total electricity to get to the total building EUI. And then you take an after retrofit case that includes some total gas and some total electricity to get to the total building EUI. It could result in a change of the EUI. But in the end, it's just a straight, energy conversion from get from, therms to KBTUs, independent of the fuel of the energy type that was used to get there.
Okay, but it is specifically about on-site. I mean, I'm raising this because there's a lot of people who always will bring up, if you're talking about electricity, well, yeah, there's all this upfront, there's all this like down upstream energy use, but that's not included in this, right? We're only talking about on-site, correct?
Right. It's based on site energy use and not source energy use. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yep. Yeah. Thanks, Brian. Next comment is Claire N.
Hi. I was just hoping if you could clarify whether Tier 1 buildings are required to benchmark and submit that report.
Yes. Tier 1 buildings will be required to report their energy use for compliance demonstration.
Gotcha. And that first deadline is the largest set of buildings on June 1st, 2028.
That's right. Yep.
And so
then
when
a year later for the next size group, and then a year after that for the smallest.
when do Tier 1 buildings have to start complying with the standards? Like calendar year 2027?
So right, yeah. So they would need to demonstrate compliance by that date.
Okay, but there's the benchmarking doesn't precede the energy standards.
Right. Yeah, that will be the kind of the
Awesome.
first
Thank you.
reporting to ODO. Yep.
Awesome. Thank you.
Blake, I don't know if you see it in the Q&A. Tim Miller has his hands raised for a follow-up on Alan's comment around fugitive emissions.
I do, yeah. And I'll say I'm still seeing raised hands for a couple folks that I think they spoke.
Okay.
So if you've already spoken and can lower your hand, that might just help us kind of move through. There we go. So next in line with the raised hand is Diane Hodiak. I think I missed.
Oh, it looks like you.
I think I accidentally unmuted Tim instead of Diane. Let me
Go ahead, Diane, if you want to switch to Diane.
Yeah. There we go. Sorry, Diane.
Can you hear me?
I can. Yeah.
Okay. So my question follows some of the others, and that is that if you're not really using the greenhouse gas emission calculations, but you say that they are somehow included in the calculus somewhere, will there be any kind of an incentive for a building owner to actually look at those options for that would reduce greenhouse gas emissions? Because I'm not sure a lot of buildings owners would understand the benefits. Some will certainly. But how would you address that if your goal is certainly to reduce not only energy use, but greenhouse gas emissions, if you're going to be in congruence with the Oregon Climate Plan and, some of the other pieces of legislation that are across the state?
Yeah, so we don't plan to have any specific incentives for like addressing the specific greenhouse gas emissions, again, because our statute is directly related to site energy use. And we don't have any incentive funding available for, application for greenhouse gas emissions. The only incentive funding that's available is for voluntary adoption of a VPS, so for buildings that aren't covered or aren't covered yet. So for early and voluntary adoption, there could be an incentive for that. But I think where where the clear tie-in is for greenhouse gas emissions reduction and, to tie into our state greenhouse gas reduction goals is just, the one-to-one relationship that energy use reduction has on greenhouse gas emissions. Any reduction in BTUs on site is a direct correlation to site greenhouse gas emissions reductions also.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Tim, next up, Tim Miller.
Great, thanks, Blake. I'm just following up a little bit on a question Alan had about the fugitive emissions. And I totally get that we're talking about site energy here for the main goals and the main targets and all that. But you're going to have this really important and helpful side calculation about GHGs, which will be great to see as you report that. And maybe if you can give the magic decoder ring to the building owners too, so that they can do their own calc if they want to. And in that side calculation, I would strongly suggest that you don't just use DEQ's number, because their definitions only let them look at what's burned on site at the burner tip. And we all know that there's a heck of a lot of upstream emissions. And when you emit it in methane form, it's 86 times or 20 times, depending on your time horizon, more potent. So I would suggest that we go beyond what DEQ is able to look at. Since you're ODO, give them a more real, complete number on the GHGs associated with their methane. And frankly, for the electricity too, you might strive for a real 8760, every hour of the day calculation on electricity too, so that a building owner knows that, well, gosh, I'm actually using a lot of juice during the heavy solar and wind hours of the year. That's better than using a lot of juice during the heavier gas or even coal hours of the day. So you might help folks really dive into their GHGs as you pull together this data. I think that'd be helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Thanks for the comment. And
You bet.
suggestion. Yeah. Next is Alan. Alan Journay.
Continue the discussion about greenhouse gases. DEQ, as Tim points out, DEQ only looks at combustion emissions of greenhouse gases, and that, as we know, is totally inadequate. But I'm also concerned that when you are, if I'm understanding correctly, that you're only looking at the emissions on site of the building, then electricity use doesn't emit when you use it. It emits, the emissions result from the generation of the electricity. So are you not considering the emissions that result from the generation of the electricity the building uses?
The emissions associated with electricity use, those scope 2 emissions would be included, yes. In the total.
The emissions are from the generation of the electricity is where I'm going.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Yes. That's what I'm
Okay,
referring to also.
because that's not on site.
Right, but the accounting for building greenhouse gas emissions associated with on-site energy use would incorporate the electricity that's consumed on site and the emissions associated with that electricity to generate it too. So they would be included, yes.
Okay, and that's better than what I was beginning to understand. But if
Okay.
that's correct, then it certainly makes sense to me to extend that assessment of emissions to the upstream emissions, which are particularly important, as Tim was stressing, in terms of any electricity that's generated from methane pollution, which is sometimes called natural gas.
Okay, yeah, thanks. Thanks for the comment.
Okay.
Yep, I appreciate it. Next comment with the raised hand is Alex Inman.
This was asked earlier and spoken about earlier. I had to step away for a little bit. My question is with respect to tier 2 buildings, and in the timeline you showed earlier, there was I believe a July 1st, maybe 2028, I think. Yes, the building benchmarking was required. Is that the only step that will be required to complete at that time for tier 2 buildings? Will there also be sort of compared to Washington State's laws, where they also require energy management plans, operations and maintenance plans, along with the benchmark? Will those 2 additional items also be required at that time, or is it just a benchmarking that needs to be required at that time?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So I'll just preface it by saying that we're in the process of our rulemaking now, and nothing is nothing's final.
Right.
But right now we're not including we're not planning to include the requirement for a tier 2 building to also develop an energy management plan and an operations and management maintenance plan. It would only be the requirement to benchmark and to report the energy usage and the associated, like building square footage and what you need to calculate a benchmark. But yeah, no, not planning to include at this point an energy management plan.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Great. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thanks. Next question is, or hand raised, is W. Woods. And I, for some reason, don't see that I can unmute. I don't see a little microphone. I'm not sure if you are connected through audio. If you can hear me and want to place a question into the Q&A, please feel free to do that. Wendy, do you see a way to unmute this person, W. Woods? With everybody else, I see a little microphone that I can unmute, but not with this particular.
Yeah, there were 1 or 2 that I also didn't see.
Okay, and I'm wondering if it has to do with maybe not being connected through like audio or some a microphone issue or something. So our apologies that we're not able to hear you. But we'll kind of come back. But I think now, I do see one other question from Trevor Weltzer that came in. Is the reporting compliance timeline determined from 3409 or through this rulemaking? That is all through House Bill 3409. Those dates are set. Yeah, thanks. So I think at this point, I'm not seeing any more hands raised or questions come in, but we'll take another pause after we get through just the rest of the presentation, which isn't much. If there are any questions that do come in, but so definitely encourage folks to get in there and make comments in the comment portals. But this is just a kind of an outline of the way that we're proceeding through our rulemaking. The slide's a little bit busy, but hopefully I can kind of explain it. So we've kind of held really three RAC meetings, Rulemaking Advisory Committee meetings so far, where we've covered, the first one of the RAC meetings, we cover chapters 1 through 3. In April of the draft rules. In the May RAC meeting, we cover chapters 4 through 6. Then we've rolled up the effort and the comments we got back from the RAC after those 2 meetings into this current public draft form that we're talking about today, and that's up on our website. And this is what we plan to do, kind of this same process through the rest of the year as we develop our rules, kind of roll up or compile a couple RAC meetings worth of draft rules of activity into one like next version of the public comment draft. So we'll do this again. The plan is to roll up the June and July RAC meeting progress into an August public meeting. So a very similar meeting in August as to what we're having today. We'll look at some of the future chapters 7, 8, and 9 of the rules, and some of the other sections in there too. So something to look ahead to for a future public meeting. And there'll probably have one more round there that I just didn't have space on the slide to fit. We've got another RAC meeting in September, and then probably another September public meeting similar to what we've got today to provide members of the public with an early view of the draft rules. And this is all leading up to our actual formal public rulemaking process, where we plan to, at this point, target having the full suite of rules open for public comment during October, with a public rulemaking hearing in November. So what we're kind of having today through the RAC meetings and happening today, and then these other public comment draft meetings, is really kind of an early process look at the draft rules to give the public an opportunity to comment, rather than just waiting for our single public rulemaking period toward the end of the year. We're hoping to get a lot of comments in as we're developing our drafts of the rules, to incorporate those so that by the time we get to our public rulemaking draft in the fall, our final one, we've hopefully addressed a lot of the major items that folks are raising before that. So, and then I mentioned before too, we've got to establish what the EUI targets specifically are for all the different types of buildings. And we will probably end up having separate meetings just focused on EUI target setting after we have our consultant on board and fully engaged. Those will probably happen maybe in conjunction with the RAC meetings, but we might have other meetings that are just focused on those targets too, because we know that'll be an area of interest for a lot of folks. This slide just shows some upcoming meetings. So we've got all the Rulemaking Advisory Committee meetings scheduled through September. Those meetings are open to the public to attend and listen in, mainly focused on RAC input and activity during those meetings, but the public can attend and just kind of listen in to hear what's going on and hear how the RAC is considering different items. We've got right now tentative public meetings in August and September. Those dates are to be determined. And I think some of the key upcoming topics for discussion, obviously setting these energy use targets for different building types, and then also defining this investment criteria pathway that considers cost effectiveness of energy measures and the ability of a building to implement these cost effective measures to meet a BPS, and then what happens if there are measures that could help get to a BPS, but if they're not cost effective. The statute, HB 3409, does allow some provisions for, a building owner doesn't need to do a measure if it's not cost effective. So how to incorporate that investment criteria pathway into Oregon's rules will be part of upcoming discussions too, that we expect to have some interest on. And again, all this is leading up to what we are hoping to have, like a full draft of all the public rules out during the month of October for a rulemaking target hearing in November, with separate meetings likely to discuss energy use intensity targets, just to focus on those and not kind of lose sight of some of the other items that we need to discuss during our REC meetings. Again, links to the comment portals for chapters 1 through 3 is one portal, chapters 4 through 6 is another portal. And then I also just wanted to take the opportunity in front of a broader group to mention that Odo is hiring to support our BPS and all of our codes and standards work. So right now we do have a facilities engineer, codes and standards engineer job posted that closes on June 16th. So certainly feel free to pass on to any professional colleagues that you think might be interested. And we'll also have a couple other postings coming soon, hopefully for a public service representative and an operations and policy analyst to support our codes and standards work at Odo. So definitely keep an eye out there on our state jobs website. And that covers the material for the presentation today. I'm happy to kind of take another moment to pause and take any hands raised or Q&A. And Wendy, I guess I'll do a quick follow-up. I know you were kind of working on the sideline to maybe take a look at that form for the Tier 2 committee to see if you were able to discover anything with that.
I'm still working on that, making sure we get the permissions changed on that form. So we'll work on that, and I don't know what's our best way of announcing if we need to send a quick note out to everybody to make sure that it's working, or I'll chat with Blake after that. But thanks for letting us know, and we'll make sure that permission issue gets cleared up. Did you answer Trevor Welcher's question about the reporting compliance timeline, if it came through HB 3409 or through the rulemaking? That he's commenting that 4 years to begin benchmarking for Tier 2 seems like a long ramp up.
I did, yeah. So those dates are all set in the statute in 3409. Let's see, we'll hang out for just a little more to see if anyone has any questions. And our Wendy and I's contact information is on the last slide here, and you can also find it on the Odo website. If you do have any general building performance standards related questions or comments, technically or with regard to our rulemaking, feel free to reach out to either of us. I'll be happy to try to help. Okay, well, I guess I'll just kind of thank folks for your interest and for logging in today, and some good comments and discussion. Feel free to, at this point, log off. I think we can hang on just for a few more minutes, but if other folks want to go ahead and sign off, we'll look forward to catching you the next time. Thanks a lot, everybody.
I did see a hand raised. Dave.
Okay, yeah, I do see.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do see. I've got. Okay, I don't see Dave's, but I see Brad and Tim's.
Or maybe it was Alex just gave us a thumbs up. I'm not sure if there's.
Oh, okay. They might just be the folks logging off, thanking.
Okay, sorry.
But, okay, I do see Brad. Brad, you should be unmuted.
Thanks, Blake. Hey, I was just wondering, I thought I had an understanding we were going to walk through a little bit of chapters 1 through 6 during this. Is that not, are we keeping ourselves to written comments on those?
If you do have, so I kind of highlighted what I think are some of the main elements for comments. If you've got those, I think today was mostly going to be because we kind of walked through those rules during the during the RAC meetings, and now it's mainly like a listening session. And if you do have any written comments or want to talk about them, separately, I'm happy to do that. But I wasn't planning to walk through line by line for chapters 1 through 6. No, and sorry if that wasn't clear.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yep. Tim.
Yeah, thanks, Blake. So there was one other thing later or further into the draft that I wanted to learn a little bit about. Can you describe how you're looking to maybe set these, set the targets relative to the average? Is it going to be, aim for 60% of the average or 80% of the average, or, what's the goal going to be? And I understand there was a discussion about distinguishing for newer buildings versus older buildings, but I have some concerns about that.
We can kind of start to talk about that with and that will be pretty significant discussion once we have the consultant on board, just with regard to like the methodology for setting the averages. But to set those and set the targets, but to set the averages, we'll look to all the existing buildings data that we have, at this point. And there's a number of data sets that are out there. NEA's commercial building stock assessments one, Portland's benchmarking data is another. We've got some data from national data from Energy Star Portfolio Manager. We've got commercial building energy consumption survey. We've got some other just like state buildings data. And then maybe a couple of other data sources that we'll look to help us define what the average building is. And then from there, because our statute is pretty like restrictive around not setting any targets that are more stringent than the average. And if you're familiar with Washington's program, theirs is actually, so in Oregon, ours is like the average is the most efficient that a target can be. In Washington, it's the flip of, it's the kind of the inverse of that, I guess, where their targets have to be more efficient than the average. So they were able to go, I think, across the board. I think it was like 15% more efficient than the average, was what they set their targets at. Ours will be a little bit different, floor versus ceiling type limits on there. But we will, we'll consider, what we think is a good balance between a realistic target that will help us get on the path toward meeting our greenhouse gas reduction goals, and one that, maybe like one that's meaningful enough, but, potentially not overly burdensome to meet with this first cycle, right? So I think there'll need to be some sort of a balance there, but in consideration of our long-term overall goals of the program, with kind of the full recognition that we expect in 5 years, because we'll have to revise these targets every 5 years after we get new buildings data in. So we expect that once we get actual data for the actual covered buildings in Oregon, there will probably be somewhat of a recalibration effort for the targets when we're basing our targets on like the specific covered buildings and not just the data that we have today. So.
Got it. So you'll have a goal for 5 years and then another one 5 years later for a given category of buildings.
Yeah, and I think at this point, like we're not really too able to project like what we think those goals will be. But I think in 5 years, we'll know a lot more once we have the actual like data for our 5,000 tier 1 covered buildings, for example. We'll do our best with this first cycle to set an appropriate average, but there might be some sort of recalibration. But kind of to your point, at some point we do expect to be able to kind of project out, okay, here's where our averages are going to be, hopefully, and our targets are going to be over the next like few cycles to help building owners kind of prepare and plan for what's coming. So,
and will those also line up with the executive order or beat it on sort of our overall energy reductions in buildings? Wasn't there like a 60% decrease goal or something like that?
Oh yeah, so that one is related to new construction, building code.
That's just codes. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. Thanks, Blake.
Yeah. Thanks. Okay, I do see a question around how long the comment portals are open. Right now though, I think those comment portals will just be open until we're done with kind of indefinitely until we're done with rulemaking, because I expect that we might want to get comments on chapters 1 through 3 or 4 through 6, even until the public comment period in the fall. So I think we'll continue to use those same comment portals for those chapters up until that point. So no deadline yet for those, really until we're done with the rulemaking. Oh, I do see some more hands raised. Brian Stewart.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to follow up on that question that Tim had about the data that you collect and how that changes the average targets that we're using for the compliance. So my understanding is new buildings, is it less than 6 years old? Is that right? Do not have to be involved in this program. I think there's a date like that. Could you remind us what that is?
So that 6 year time frame actually applies for if there's a local jurisdiction that wants to adopt a building performance standard that goes above and beyond the state building performance standard. That's where that 6 year timeline restriction kicks in. For the state BPS, any existing building that's that's occupied. So like after a building is built and occupied, it becomes, if it's over the square footage threshold, and one of the right, the applicable building types, then it would fall under the state BPS. So there's
Okay.
not a similar 6 year window
see.
for state BPS. Yeah.
Thank you. That's great. So then it would follow, then it would seem that as new buildings come online and become part of the calculations, that because the building code standards are more strict than they were in the past, you should get this continual lowering of the statewide average targets that buildings have to hit. So even though we don't have strict standards that are more stringent than the average, we should see buildings, the requirements get more and more strict over time through this program. Is that correct?
I think that is a realistic assumption. Yes, that combined with bringing new, more efficient buildings online, and then also, if some percentage of buildings don't meet the target and they implement measures to get up to the average, then it will shift the average further to the, further down over time too. So you could do a hypothetical math, average calculation there to see how much it affects. But yeah, right. So both like bringing up the existing buildings and adding new, more efficient buildings to the mix to replace potentially older buildings would expect to shift that average downward over time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Alan? Are you able to, let's see. Oh, I think we might have. There we go.
Okay, thanks so much indeed. I was having difficulty unmuting myself. I just went to the portal and I was trying to copy and paste some comments into the box, and it wouldn't take it wouldn't take a copy and paste. Is that?
Oh, okay.
Do I actually have to type them in again?
You're saying it'll take a type, but it won't take a copy and paste?
That's correct.
That's a functionality challenge for sure. Let us look into that a little bit, because it seems like you would want the ability to like take some offline notes and then just when it comes time to copy and paste.
It does seem as though that should be happening.
Yeah, let us look into that. See if there's maybe a better way to do that. And I wonder if it's maybe like try it in a different browser. Maybe there's an opportunity there. Maybe it's a browser thing, but we'll check that out.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Neil, I think there we go. Neil Bonsgard with a hand raised.
Yep, can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. I was just curious, having the energy or the EUI's target be at 50%, was that something that was included in statute, I'm assuming?
It is. Yep.
Okay. And then I guess my question is
sorry to clarify. Not necessarily at the average, but not more stringent than the average.
Not more stringent than the average. And so I guess my question is, and this would have been more timely during the legislative period, but with that restriction in there, and there also being a caveat for like the cost effectiveness test, I'm just wondering why we chose to be less stringent than Washington while also including the backstop, with the assumption that these improvements would also be cost effective.
Mhm.
And
Yeah, I don't know that I can offer any any information or insight into how or why the Oregon target language is different than Washington's. I will say that Washington has a similar provision around cost effectiveness in their investment criteria as well. So
Yeah.
that element's there in the Washington program, but I won't venture to guess why Oregon's average language is different. So
Thanks.
yep. Do you have another question, Neil? I see your hand's still raised.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
I had unmuted myself. I guess with that being the case, and with there being the cost effectiveness provision, I would just have the comment of encouraging us to be as ambitious as the statute allows us to, recognizing that there is a natural process of bringing up the average over time, but our cap on that is already lower than our neighbors who have a successful program. And so I think we should recognize that we have tools in the toolbox, including the cost effectiveness provision, including all of the tier 1 versus tier 2. And so we really should use this tool to its fullest extent as soon as we can, so then that process can move forward and we can improve our buildings. Comment doesn't need response.
Thanks. Yeah, go ahead, Brian.
Just on that cost effectiveness question, am I correct in understanding that the way that the statute is written, that cost effectiveness does not include social cost of carbon or any of these other societal impacts from greenhouse gas emissions?
I think that's the way that it's structured, yeah. And we can have some more in-depth discussions around that as we kind of get into the cost effectiveness language a little more deeply. But yeah, I think that's kind of the direction. Right.
But it sounds like you think there might be some opportunity for discussion to include that somehow, or
I think we're open to including it as part of the discussion. Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay. Let's see. I'm not seeing any more raised hands or questions coming in. So again, thanks everybody for attending today. I think we've got a couple things to check on with regard to the comment forms, and we'll do that. And we should be able to send an update to the EPS distribution list once we get that sorted out. So thanks everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and look forward to future chats. Feel free to reach out with any questions in the meantime. Thanks a lot.